At my daughter's wedding, her fiancé pulled my chair away as I sat down and I fell to the floor. The guests laughed, but then the laughter stopped cold. Not because of me, but because of a single question. His own father asked a question that made no sense to anyone in that room, except to me. The soft music faded. Kevin, my future son-in-law, raised his champagne flute, the light from the massive crystal chandeliers dancing on the glass. He smiled a perfect, practiced smile. And now, his voice echoed through the opulent ballroom. I'd like to invite a very special person to the head table, my wonderful father-in-law, Mr. Frank Miller. A polite round of applause rippled through the room. I felt 100 pairs of eyes turn to me. I stood trying to smooth the front of the borrowed suit jacket. It was a little tight in the shoulders, as if to remind me I didn't belong here. I started walking toward the head table, each step on the polished marble floor feeling heavy. I could feel the contrast between my worn leather shoes and the splendor around me. My hands, with the calluses of a lifetime of labor, felt alien as they brushed against the silk-covered chair Kevin was holding. All I wanted was to make my daughter Sarah happy. She was standing there radiant in her wedding dress, but the look in her eyes as she gazed at Kevin held an admiration that twisted something in my gut. She was so desperate to belong to this world. "Have a seat, Dad," Kevin said, his smile widening. It seemed like a kind gesture. I turned my back to him, slowly lowering myself into the chair. And then it happened. In the moment my weight shifted, I felt the chair disappear. There was only empty space, a split second of pure disorienting shock before gravity took over. I fell. I fell hard. My hip hit the marble floor with a dry, sickening thud that echoed in the room's sudden silence. A sharp, searing pain shot through my leg, but it was nothing compared to what came next. "Oh, my apologies," Kevin's voice rang out, laced with a cruel mockery only I could hear. "I guess your place is on the floor, where people like you belong." A single titter of laughter broke the silence, then another, and then like a dam breaking the room erupted. Their laughter washed over me, a cruel and ugly sound. They were laughing at my pain and my humiliation. I looked up, seeing their strange, smiling faces enjoying my disgrace. I searched for my daughter. Sarah was standing there, her face pale, a hand covering her mouth. But she didn't move. She didn't say a word. She just stood there, helpless and silent. Her silence hurt more than 1,000 words, cut deeper than any laugh. It was the final betrayal. In that moment, something inside of me, something that had patiently endured for years, finally shattered. In its place, a cold silence formed, a resolve as hard as steel. The last straw hadn't just fallen. The dam had been obliterated. And then, as suddenly as it began, the laughter died. A heavy silence fell over the room. A figure was moving with purpose from the head table. It was General David Thompson, Kevin's father. He walked straight past his son without a glance. He walked past Sarah as if she wasn't there. He stopped directly in front of me. The entire room held its breath. A 4-star general, a titan of the defense industry, was looking at me, Frank Miller, a retired old soldier, with an expression of unmistakable respect. He slowly crouched down, his expensive suit creasing on the marble. "Sir," General Thompson said, his voice low but clear, carrying the weight of command. "Is that you?" He offered me his hand. I took it, and he pulled me to my feet with a steady strength. "Sergeant Miller," he said, his voice louder now, still holding my arm. "It's an honor. It has been too many years." The room was completely silent. Kevin and Sarah stood frozen, their faces a mixture of shock and horror. A general was calling her poor father-in-law. Sergeant and Sir General Thompson turned, and his ice-cold eyes landed on his son. "You," he bit out, "you and I will have a talk later." He turned back to me, his voice low again, meant only for me. "We need to talk, not here. Give me your number. I'll call you tomorrow." I nodded, reciting my phone number. A silent agreement was made in the middle of that chaotic ballroom. I couldn't stay a second longer. I gently removed my arm from his grasp, gave him a nod, and turned to leave. I didn't look at Sarah, didn't look at Kevin. I just walked, keeping my back straight despite the throbbing pain in my hip. "Dad, wait!" I heard Sarah's desperate voice call after me. I didn't stop. I walked right out of that ballroom, past the stunned faces of the guests. When the ballroom doors closed behind me, I finally let out a breath. My old Ford pickup truck was parked in the farthest corner of the lot. Its familiar engine rattled to life in the quiet Dallas night. Sitting in the cab, I no longer felt the pain of humiliation. I felt like a soldier who had just been given his orders. This wasn't a personal vendetta. This was a mission. Kevin wasn't just arrogant. He was a bomb, an unstable explosive device, and he was about to attach himself to my daughter's life. My mission was clear: disarm the bomb before it destroyed everything I had left in this world. And I, Sergeant Frank Miller, the best bomb disposal expert the U.S. Army ever had, was ready to get to work. The operation had just begun. The next evening, I drove my old Ford not to a fancy lawyer's office or a high-rise restaurant, but to an address on the west side of the city. It was VFW Post 187, a small, unassuming bar tucked away on a side street. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale beer wood polish and something that felt like memory itself. Faded black and white photographs of young soldiers hung on the walls, their smiles frozen in time. This was my world, a world built on firm handshakes and promises that didn't require paper. I chose a booth in the darkest corner. A few minutes later, the door opened and General David Thompson walked in. In civilian clothes, he still carried an unmistakable air of command. He didn't look around. He walked straight to my table as if he already knew its precise coordinates. "Sergeant Miller," he said, his voice low and firm. He held out his hand and I shook it. "General," I replied. We sat in silence for a moment, letting the quiet noise of the bar settle around us. He looked me in the eye, and the polished veneer of the powerful CEO was gone. I saw only a fellow soldier. "I am ashamed, Frank," he said, using my first name for the first time. "What my son did, there is no excuse. It was an act of profound dishonor." I just nodded. There was nothing to add. "I owe you my life." He continued, his gaze unwavering. "More than that, I owe you the lives of my men. Afghanistan. That day outside Kandahar. I still see it in my sleep." The memory was sharp and clear for me too. A complex IED buried in a culvert with a pressure plate tied to a secondary charge. It was a sophisticated trap designed to take out the entire bomb squad. I remember the sweat beading on my brow, the absolute stillness required as my fingers traced the wires. General Thompson, a colonel back then, had refused to pull the rest of his team back. He stood his ground. He trusted me. My hands had been steady then, just as my mind was steady now. "You did your job, General. I did mine," I said simply. "You did more than that," he corrected. "You gave a dozen men a future, and I have allowed my son to grow into a man who would spit on that kind of sacrifice." He leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. "I suspect his company Apex Holdings is dirty. It grew too fast, the profits are too clean. It feels wrong. But I have no proof and I'm too close. He's my son, I'm blind." He slid a folded napkin across the table. On it was a name. Ironclad Consulting LLC. I believe this is one of his shell corporations. It's a starting point. I want you to find out what he's building, Frank, and I want you to dismantle it. He pulled out a checkbook. I will fund the entire operation. Whatever you need. Consider it operational expenses. I pushed the checkbook back toward him. I appreciate the offer, General, but this isn't for hire. I'll handle the expenses. This is a mission, not a job. He studied my face, then nodded slowly. I understand. Just tell me what you need. Information, I said. And for you to stay out of sight. He can't know we've spoken. A pact was made in that dim, quiet bar. Not between a general and a sergeant, but between two men who understood the meaning of a debt. I didn't go home and call a lawyer. I went home and called my unit. The first call was to Marcus Jones, a man we called Sticks. He was a retired intelligence analyst, a master at seeing patterns in paperwork that others saw as just noise. Frank, his voice came through the line, tired but warm. I thought you were busy learning how to fish. New kind of fishing, Sticks, I said. I've got a name I need you to run. See what shakes loose. Send it over, he said without hesitation. I'll clear my desk. The second call was to Anya Sharma. We called her Glitch. She was younger than us, a former Army cybersecurity specialist who could walk through digital walls like they were made of smoke. Sergeant Miller, she answered, her voice quick and sharp. Don't tell me your Wi-Fi is down again. Worse, I said. I need you to look inside a box without opening the lid. There was a pause, then I could almost hear her smile. Just tell me how deep you want me to go, Sarge. The next afternoon they arrived at my small apartment. Sticks was a tall, thin man who looked more like a history professor than a spy. Glitch was a whirlwind of restless energy, her laptop bag covered in cryptic stickers. They didn't need to ask why they were here. Loyalty in our world was an unspoken contract. They turned my quiet living room into a command center. Laptops opened, secure hard drives were connected, and a large whiteboard was propped against my bookshelf. The quiet Spartan space was suddenly alive with a focused military energy. Okay, Frank, run the intel brief, Sticks said, pulling up a chair. I told them everything. The wedding, the fall, the laughter, Sarah's silence, the general's intervention. When I finished, Glitch let out a low whistle. He did what? She asked, her fingers pausing over her keyboard. A dangerous look crossed her face. This was no longer just a favor for their old sergeant. Now it was personal. They were defending one of their own. Sticks just nodded slowly, his expression grim. Okay, he said softly. Let's get to work. He wrote Ironclad Consulting LLC on the whiteboard. The operation had a name, and the bomb squad was back in business. A few days later, the first counterattack came. A sharp knock on my door revealed a young man in a suit that cost more than my truck. He introduced himself as Kevin's lawyer. His smile was slick and condescending. Mr. Miller, he began, my client feels terrible about the unfortunate accident at the wedding. He slid a thick envelope onto my small hallway table. He's offering this as a gesture of goodwill. $50,000 for your emotional distress. I looked at the envelope, then back at him. There's just a small document to sign, the lawyer continued, pulling a folded paper from his briefcase. A standard non-disclosure agreement. It just ensures the family's privacy is respected, and it stipulates that you cease all contact with General Thompson regarding this matter. I didn't touch the envelope. I didn't look at the paper. I just met the lawyer's gaze. My dignity, I said, my voice quiet and even, is not for sale. Please show yourself out. His smile faltered for a second before he recovered. He picked up the envelope and left without another word. The next attack came that evening. The phone rang and it was Sarah. Her voice was thick with forced tears. Dad, why are you doing this? You're making everything so difficult. I stayed silent. Kevin was just trying to help you, she sobbed. That money was for you. Now his father is furious with him, and it's all because of you. You're ruining everything. The emotional shrapnel was meant to wound me to make me feel guilty. But my skin was thicker now. The cold resolve had settled deep in my bones. Sarah, I said, my voice calm, I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer it honestly. Did you think what Kevin did to me at your wedding was right? The line went silent. I could hear her breathing a ragged, uneven sound. She couldn't say yes, and she wouldn't say no. Her silence was the only answer I needed. I understand, I said softly, and the words were a final acceptance of a painful truth. Goodbye, Sarah. I ended the call before she could respond. The emotional leverage they held over me was gone. I had cut the wire. I turned back to the living room where the glow of monitors cast long shadows on the wall. Styx was hunched over a pile of financial records and Glitch was typing furiously, lines of code scrolling down her screen. The emotional battle was over. The strategic war had just begun. I didn't go home and call a lawyer. Lawyers operate in a world of filings and motions, a slow grind of paper. What I needed was speed, precision, and absolute loyalty. I went home and called my unit. My apartment is a simple place. The furniture is old but clean. The walls are bare except for a framed photograph of my late wife, Helen, and a unit citation from my time in the service. It's a quiet space, disciplined, a reflection of the life I've lived. I sat at my small kitchen table, the silence a welcome contrast to the noise of the wedding. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and made the first call. The phone rang twice before a familiar gravelly voice answered. Frank, I thought you were busy learning how to fish. It was Marcus Jones, a man we called Styx. He was a retired intelligence analyst, a master at finding the patterns in a blizzard of paperwork. He could follow a dollar through a dozen shell companies and tell you the name of the man who printed the fake letterhead. We had spent more nights than I could count in dusty tents hunched over maps and reports. New kind of fishing sticks, I said. I've got a name I need you to run. See what shakes loose when you rattle the cage. There was no hesitation, no questions about why. That wasn't our way. Send it over, he said simply. I'll clear my desk. The second call was to Anya Sharma. We called her Glitch. She was a decade younger than us, a former Army cybersecurity specialist who could walk through digital firewalls like they were made of smoke. She had the kind of brilliant, restless mind that saw the world in lines of code. Sergeant Miller, she answered, her voice a rapid-fire burst of energy. Don't tell me your Wi-Fi is down again. I told you that router is a historical artifact. Worse, Glitch, I said. I need you to look inside a box without opening the lid. I could almost hear her smile through the phone. It was the kind of challenge she lived for. Just tell me how deep you want me to go, Sarge, and how much noise I'm allowed to make. Quiet as a whisper, I told her. For now. Consider it done, she said, sending you my secure link. The next afternoon they arrived. Styx looked like a history professor who had gotten lost on his way to a lecture, tall and thin, with thoughtful eyes. Glitch was a whirlwind, her laptop bag covered in cryptic stickers, her energy barely contained. They didn't bring casseroles or condolences. They brought equipment. My quiet living room was transformed. What was once a simple space with a couch and a coffee table became a command center. Sticks set up 2 laptops connecting one to a portable scanner. Glitch unpacked a rig with 3 monitors, a secure hard drive the size of a brick, and a tangle of cables she organized with practiced efficiency. A large whiteboard was propped against my bookshelf, erasing years of quiet reading with the promise of strategy and action. "Okay, Frank, run the intel brief," Sticks said as he pulled up a chair. His voice was calm, but his eyes were hard. I told them everything: the wedding, the fall, the laughter, Sarah's silence, the general's intervention and his suspicions about his son's company. I told them the name he had given me. Glitch stopped typing, her fingers hovering over the keys. She turned to look at me, and the playful energy was gone, replaced by a cold fire. "He did what?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Sticks just shook his head slowly, his expression grim. This was no longer just a favor for their old sergeant. I could see the shift in the room. Now it was personal. In our world, you protect your own. It was the simplest and most unbreakable rule. "The money the general offered is for operational expenses only," I said. "Equipment, databases, anything we need. This isn't a job for hire." "We know, Frank," Sticks said, his focus already on his screen. "We wouldn't have it any other way." He wrote the name on the whiteboard, in clean block letters, Ironclad Consulting, LLC. "This is where we start," he said. "Glitch. I need everything you can find on their digital footprint. Incorporation records, server locations, associated email accounts. I'll start running the name through the financial databases." Glitch's fingers began to fly across her keyboard, the clicking sound filling the small apartment. "Going in," she murmured, her eyes locked on the screen. The operation was live. The bomb squad was back in business, and we were about to find out just how deep the wires went. The first counterattack came 3 days later. It arrived not as a phone call, but as a sharp, confident knock on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole to see a young man in a perfectly tailored suit holding a leather briefcase. He looked like he had been assembled in a boardroom. I opened the door. His smile was slick and condescending. "Mr. Miller," he began. "My name is Jonathan Stiles. I represent your son-in-law, Kevin Thompson." He didn't wait for an invitation, but I didn't offer one. I simply blocked the doorway. "Mr. Thompson feels a great deal of remorse about the unfortunate accident at the wedding." He said the words sliding out smoothly. "He understands you may have suffered some emotional distress." He placed a thick envelope on the small table in my entryway. "He is offering this as a gesture of goodwill, $50,000. I looked at the envelope, then back at him. It was an attempt to put a price tag on my humiliation, to turn my honor into a transaction. "There is just a small document to sign," the lawyer continued, pulling a folded paper from his briefcase. "It was a non-disclosure agreement. It simply ensures the family's privacy is respected moving forward. And of course it stipulates that you cease all contact with General Thompson regarding this matter. A family issue should remain within the family." So that was the real objective. They weren't afraid of my feelings. They were afraid of Kevin's father. I met the lawyer's gaze, and my voice was quiet and even when I spoke. "My dignity," I said, "is not for sale. Please show yourself out." His professional smile faltered for just a second. He quickly recovered, picked up the envelope, and gave a curt nod. "I'll let my client know you've refused his generous offer," he said, and then he was gone. The second attack came that evening. It was more personal and far more painful. The phone rang, and I saw Sarah's name on the screen. I hesitated before answering. Her voice was thick with forced tears from the very first word. Dad, why are you doing this? You're making everything so difficult. I stayed silent, listening to the practiced tremor in her voice. Kevin was just trying to help you, she sobbed. That money was for you. Now his father is furious with him, and it's all because of you. You embarrassed him. You embarrassed me. You're ruining everything. Each word was a piece of shrapnel designed to wound and manipulate to make me feel guilty for the crime that had been committed against me. But the man who would have buckled under that emotional assault was gone, left behind on that marble floor. Sarah, I said, my voice steady and calm. I am going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer it honestly. I paused, letting the silence stretch. Did you think what Kevin did to me at your wedding was right? The line went dead quiet. I could hear her ragged, uneven breathing. She was trapped. She couldn't say yes because that would make her a monster. And she wouldn't say no because that would mean admitting her current behavior was a betrayal. Her silence was her choice. It was the only answer I needed. I understand, I said softly, and the words were a final, painful acceptance of the truth. Goodbye, Sarah. I ended the call before she could find her script again. The emotional leverage they thought they had over me had been cut. I turned back to my living room where the glow of monitors cast long shadows on the wall. The emotional battle was over. The strategic war was now in full swing. With the emotional attacks deflected, the real work began. My living room, my quiet command center, became a place of intense, silent focus. For days, the only sounds were the soft clicking of keyboards, the rustle of printed documents, and the low murmur of voices as we traced the path of Kevin's deceit. The air was thick with coffee and concentration. We were a unit again, moving with a shared purpose that needed no explanation. Styx stood in front of the whiteboard, his marker moving with a slow, deliberate precision. He was mapping a ghost empire. What started with ironclad consulting had quickly branched out. Arrows connected a web of LLCs with bland, forgettable names: Midwest Logistics, Pinnacle Group, Azure Ventures. Each one was a dead end, a shell designed to hold money for a moment before passing it on. He's layering sticks, said, tapping the board. It's a classic wash cycle. Money comes in here, gets bounced between 3 or 4 of these entities, and comes out over here looking clean. The paper trail is a maze, intentionally confusing. He had managed to get his hands on the initial investor lists for a few of the shells. Something's not right about these names, Frank. I've run them. They're not the usual high-net-worth individuals you see in these kinds of funds. He squinted at his notes. They're just regular people. Teachers, mechanics, retirees. How are they getting tens of thousands of dollars to invest in a high-risk fund? While Styx followed the paper, Glitch was hunting in the dark. She spent hours in front of her triple monitor setup, her face illuminated by scrolling lines of code. She was a ghost in their machine, moving through their digital world with silent, invisible steps. She found a weakness in the security of their third-party server, a small back door left open by a lazy IT contractor. It was all she needed. "I'm in," she whispered one afternoon, her voice tight. Peeling back the encryption on the client files for Apex Holdings. This is heavily protected. Styx and I stood behind her, watching as she worked. Blocks of scrambled text filled the screen. Glitch's fingers flew across the keyboard, a blur of motion. Then a file directory appeared. It was labeled Client Portfolios, Legacy Division. Legacy Division, Styx murmured. What kind of name is that for an investment fund? Opening the first client file now, Glitch said. A document appeared on the screen. It was a standard investment agreement, but at the top, attached to the client's name, was a designation that made my blood run cold. It read, Source of Funds SGLI Payout. Service Members Group Life Insurance. The life insurance payment a family receives when a soldier is killed in action. Glitch clicked open another file. Same designation. And another. And another. The names on the screen were not just investors. They were Gold Star families. The money Kevin was moving, the money that funded his lavish lifestyle and gaudy wedding, was the final measure of sacrifice given by soldiers who never came home. He was promising these grieving families high-yield, safe investments for their future, then funneling their money into his shell companies and declaring the investment a total loss. A wave of nausea washed over me. This was a level of depravity I hadn't imagined. This wasn't just fraud. It was desecration. Glitch pushed her chair back from the desk, her face pale. The usual fire in her eyes had been replaced by a chilling fury. Sarge, she said, her voice barely a whisper. They're vultures. They're picking over the bones of our own. Styx slammed a file onto the coffee table, the sound cracking through the quiet room. That's it, he said, his voice thick with rage. That's the mission. We burn them to the ground. I walked over to the small bookshelf and picked up the framed photo of my old unit. Young faces grinning in the harsh desert sun. Some of them never made it back. I thought of their families, of the quiet, dignified grief they carried. And I thought of Kevin using their sacrifice as his personal bank account. The last trace of any personal grievance I held, any pain from the wedding, evaporated. This was no longer about me. It was no longer about Sarah. This was about honor. It was about a sacred line that had been crossed. I turned back to my team. My voice was steady, hard as iron. We are no longer on a reconnaissance mission, I said. This is now a targeted strike. I want everything, every dollar, every secret account, every lie he's ever told. We are going to dismantle his entire operation. And we are going to do it with extreme prejudice. The hunt was on. And for the first time, I understood. I wasn't defusing a bomb. I was building one. And when it detonated, it would take Kevin's entire world down with it. The discovery that Kevin was preying on Gold Star families changed the temperature in the room. The mission was no longer a quiet, strategic exercise. It was a duty. A cold fire burned in all of us, the kind that doesn't flicker. It just consumes. As we dug deeper, it became clear that Kevin felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. He must have sensed the new, colder pressure from his father. And like any cornered animal, he started to get sloppy. It began with a black sedan that started parking across the street from my apartment building. It was there in the morning when I left for my early shift, and it was there in the evening when I came home. An amateur's attempt at surveillance. I took pictures of the car, the license plate, and the man sitting behind the wheel, pretending to read a newspaper. Styx ran the plates. The car was registered to a private security firm with financial ties to Apex Holdings. It was clumsy, but it was a clear message. We see you. Next came the letter. It was pushed under my door one night, a single sheet of cheap printer paper with words stamped in block letters. Old man, back off. You don't know who you're dealing with. It was meant to intimidate, to make me feel isolated and afraid. I put on a pair of gloves, slid the note into a plastic evidence bag, and handed it to Styx. He scanned it and added it to our growing file. He's getting scared. Styx noted a grim satisfaction in his voice. Panic makes people stupid. The final escalation was the most vicious. A formal letter arrived by courier from Kevin's lawyer. It was a notice of intent. They were preparing to file a petition with the court for legal guardianship over me. The letter was filled with carefully worded concerns about my recent erratic behavior, my potential cognitive decline, and my inability to manage my own affairs. They were trying to strip me of my rights to legally silence me by declaring me mentally unfit. It was a vile, cowardly attack, and it was a declaration of total war. We used every move against him. The surveillance photos, the threatening note, the lawyer's letter, they all became exhibits in our own private file. Each threat was another nail Kevin was hammering into his own coffin. But defending wasn't enough. It was time to go on the offensive. It was time to set a trap. The opportunity came from Glitch. She had been monitoring Kevin's business communications, and she found something big. "Sarge, you need to see this," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "Apex Holdings is the lead bidder on a massive government contract, a new barracks and training facility at Fort Hood." Styx and I looked at the screen. The contract was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It was the kind of legitimate high-profile project Kevin needed to solidify his empire. "The final decision goes through a review board at the Department of Defense," Styx said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "A board where I'm sure General Thompson has a friend or two." A plan began to form, a classic intelligence operation. We weren't just going to expose his past crimes. We were going to lure him into committing a new one he couldn't talk his way out of. We were going to build a honeypot. Styx made a call to another member of our old unit, a man named David Chen. We called him Deacon. He was a master of disguise and deception, a man who could walk into a room and become whatever character the mission required. He had the calm, steady nerves of a poker champion. The plan was simple, elegant, and ruthless. Deacon would become Mr. Allen, a disgruntled mid-level official from the Department of Defense Procurement Office. Glitch worked her magic, creating a convincing digital footprint for him. A temporary government email address, a plausible LinkedIn profile, and a burner phone with a Washington, D.C. area code. Through a trusted back channel, General Thompson let a rumor slip into the world of defense contractors. The rumor was that the Fort Hood contract had a fixer, an inside man, who could guarantee a winning bid for the right price. 2 days later, Deacon, in his role as Mr. Allen, made a quiet, deniable call to Kevin's office. He hinted that he was the man who could make the Fort Hood contract a certainty. He spoke of a consulting fee that would need to be paid to an offshore account to streamline the approval process. It was a direct offer of bribery. We waited. For a full day, there was silence. I started to think maybe Kevin wasn't as reckless as we thought. Then Glitch's monitor pinged. It was an encrypted email from Kevin's personal account to the burner email address she had created for Deacon. The message was short and to the point. "I am interested in discussing the streamlining process. Name a time and place." He had taken the bait. He was walking toward the tripwire, completely unaware that the man who had taught me how to build it was watching his every step. The bomb was about to be armed. Kevin's arrogance was a powerful weapon, but it had no guardrails. It was the flaw we had counted on. He agreed to the meeting. The location was a sterile, anonymous conference room at an airport hotel, a place designed for conversations that leave no trace. But our conversations would leave a permanent record. Back in my living room, the three of us were gathered around Glitch's monitors. The tension was a living thing in the small apartment. We had one video feed from a camera hidden in a smoke detector, and a high-fidelity audio feed from a microphone concealed in a pen on the conference table. "Video is clean, mic is hot," Glitch confirmed, her voice low. "Deacon is in position." On the screen, Deacon, our old teammate, sat at the table. He looked nothing like a soldier. Dressed in a slightly rumpled suit, he looked like a career bureaucrat. A man who was tired, underpaid, and easily overlooked. He was perfect. A few minutes later, Kevin strode into the room. He exuded confidence, his expensive suit sharp, his handshake firm. He looked like a predator who had just spotted an easy meal. He thought he was in control. Deacon played his part beautifully. He was quiet, cautious, and spoke in the clipped, acronym-filled language of a government paper pusher. They discussed the Fort Hood contract, the bidding process, the technical specifications. Kevin was smooth, charming, and utterly convincing. Then Deacon dangled the bait. "Look," he said, leaning forward and lowering his voice. "My superiors are sensitive. Any consulting fee would need to be structured in a way that is completely untraceable. I can't have my career jeopardized by messy accounting." This was the opening Kevin had been waiting for, the chance to show how clever he was. A smug smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Mr. Allen," he said, leaning back in his chair, "discretion is the foundation of my business. Messy is not a word in my vocabulary. I have a bulletproof system for these kinds of transactions." In our command center, Styx and I exchanged a look. Glitch hit the record button on a secondary backup. Deacon pressed him, playing the part of a nervous accomplice. "Bulletproof. How can I be sure the funds are clean? I can't have this traced back to me." Kevin's ego took the stage. "Let me explain," he said, with the pride of an artist describing his masterpiece. "I have a private investment pool, the Legacy Division. It's funded by, let's call them passive investors. Their money is the perfect source for this kind of off-the-books transaction. It's clean, it's untraceable, and the best part is the investors never ask any questions. They trust me completely." He was boasting. He was proudly describing how he stole from the families of our fallen soldiers to fund his criminal enterprises. He was confessing to everything, his voice captured in crystal-clear audio, his face smiling on our screen. He had no idea he was speaking to 3 veterans who considered his words a declaration of war. He thought he was impressing a corrupt official. Instead, he was arming the bomb that would bring his world crashing down. "Consider it done," Kevin said, shaking Deacon's hand. "The fee will be in your account within 48 hours. He walked out of the room with the swagger of a man who had just conquered the world. Back in my apartment, we were silent for a long moment, the gravity of what we had just captured settling over us. Glitch saved the encrypted video and audio files to 3 separate secure drives. Styx turned to me, his eyes hard. "We got him, Frank," he said. "We got him cold." I looked at the screen at the empty chair where my daughter's husband had just admitted to his monstrous crimes. The timer on the bomb was now ticking, and I was the one holding the detonator. The summons came on a Tuesday morning. It was an official email from General Thompson's executive assistant calling for an emergency board meeting at his corporate headquarters. The subject was a time-sensitive investment opportunity. Kevin and his key partners from Apex Holdings were required to attend. As a footnote, it mentioned that Sarah was also invited to facilitate a long-overdue family reconciliation. It was a perfectly crafted piece of bait, appealing to both his greed and his ego. I was invited as well under the title of Special Consultant on Veteran Affairs. The Thompson Corporation headquarters was a tower of glass and steel that cut into the Dallas sky. It was a world away from my quiet apartment. The boardroom was on the top floor, a cavern of dark wood, polished black stone, and a single massive table that looked like it had been carved from a fallen giant. A floor-to-ceiling window offered a panoramic view of the city below. It was a room designed to make you feel small. I arrived with Styx and Glitch, who were introduced as my support staff. We were the first ones there. General Thompson greeted us with a firm handshake and a grim nod. He was in his element here. This was his battlefield. Kevin and Sarah arrived 20 minutes later. They walked in radiating confidence. Kevin was a conquering hero about to be welcomed into the inner sanctum of real power. Sarah was beaming her face full of hope. She thought this was the moment her father-in-law would finally accept them, the moment the unpleasantness would be smoothed over with money and a handshake. She squeezed my arm as she passed. "Isn't this wonderful, Dad?" she whispered. I knew he'd come around. The board members, a collection of serious, powerful men and women, filed in and took their seats. The air grew still thick with anticipation. General Thompson stood at the head of the table. His voice was cold and formal, a general addressing his troops before a battle. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began. "This corporation was built on a foundation of integrity, honor, and an unwavering commitment to this country. Before we consider any new partnership, we conduct rigorous due diligence. It is a non-negotiable part of our process." He looked directly at Kevin, who sat a little straighter, a proud smile on his face. He thought this was praise. "We have recently been evaluating a potential partnership with a promising young company, Apex Holdings," the general continued. "As part of that process, my team has compiled a brief presentation on their operational methods. Please direct your attention to the screen." He gave a slight nod. The lights in the room dimmed. Kevin leaned forward, ready to see his own success, projected in glowing charts and figures. Sarah looked at him with pure adoration. But the screen didn't show charts. It showed the sterile beige wall of a hotel conference room. It showed Deacon, our Mr. Allen, sitting at a table. And then it showed Kevin walking in full of swagger and confidence. The hidden camera footage was perfectly clear. The audio was flawless, filling the silent boardroom with every word. I watched Sarah's face as the conversation began. Her hopeful smile slowly began to stiffen. I watched Kevin's expression shift from pride to confusion, and then to dawning horror. The board members sat like stone statues as they listened to Kevin agree to bribe a government official. Then came the moment of detonation. On the screen, Deacon's voice was calm. "Bulletproof, how can I be sure the funds are clean?" And then came Kevin's voice, arrogant and proud, booming through the boardroom's sound system. "Let me explain. I have a private investment pool, the Legacy Division. It's funded by, let's call them, passive investors. Their money is the perfect source. The best part is the investors never ask any questions. They trust me completely." A new document flashed on the screen beside the video. It was a list of names. The board members leaned forward to read them. They were the names of the Gold Star families, the passive investors, whose life insurance payouts Kevin was using as his personal slush fund. A quiet gasp escaped from a woman on the board. One of the male board members, a retired colonel, slowly took off his glasses and placed them on the table, his face a mask of cold fury. But the video wasn't finished. Kevin's voice continued, sealing his own fate. "It's a perfect system," he boasted. "Completely untraceable. I use their sacrifice to fund our success. It's the ultimate tribute when you think about it." Sarah made a small choking sound. She stared at the screen, then at the man beside her, as if seeing him for the first time. The man she married wasn't a brilliant businessman. He was a monster. The illusion that had been her entire world shattered into a million pieces in that instant. Her face crumpled and a silent sob shook her entire body. Kevin was ashen. The color had completely drained from his face. He opened his mouth to speak, to object, but no sound came out. He was exposed, stripped bare in front of the very people he had been so desperate to impress. He was a fraud, and now everyone knew it. The video ended. the screen went black. The lights in the room slowly came back up, revealing the shock and disgust on every face. I remained perfectly still, watching it all unfold. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I only felt a profound, quiet sense of justice. The bomb had been detonated. General Thompson stood, his face carved from granite. He looked down the long, polished table at his son. "That," the general said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that filled the silent room, "concludes our due diligence." In the crushing silence that followed the video, I stood up. I moved to the head of the table, not with the hesitant steps of a grieving father, but with the steady gait of a soldier. My voice, when it came, was not filled with emotion. It was calm, clear, and precise. It was the voice I used to use for after-action reports. "What you have just seen," I began, addressing the silent board members, "is the mechanism of the crime. Now I will show you the cost." I nodded to Glitch. On the large screen, a new series of documents appeared. It was a flowchart. At the top was a photograph of a smiling young man in an army uniform. "This was Sergeant Daniel Peterson," I said. "He was killed in action in 2018, leaving behind a wife and a 2-year-old daughter. This is the record of his life insurance payout, intended to provide for his family's future." An arrow pointed from the payout to a bank transfer. The recipient was not his widow. It was Ironclad Consulting, LLC. From there, I continued as Glitch brought up the next document. The money was moved to another entity, Azure Ventures, and then to a third. With each transfer, a management fee was deducted. Finally, what little remained was invested in a high-risk tech stock that was designed to fail. The final document showed the account's value less than $100. Apex Holdings then sent a letter of condolence to Sergeant Peterson's widow, informing her that due to unforeseeable market volatility, the entire investment had been lost. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each board member. This was not market volatility. This was theft. And Sergeant Peterson's family was not the only one. I let the weight of that statement settle. I had laid the bomb on the table for all to see. General Thompson then rose, his face a mask of cold fury and profound shame. He looked at the board members, then his gaze fell upon his son, who was staring at the table, a broken man. "As chairman of this corporation," the general's voice boomed with authority, "I am informing you all that this complete package of evidence, along with the recording you just witnessed, will be turned over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Securities and Exchange Commission, effective immediately." He took a step toward Kevin, his voice dropping to a low, guttural growl. "You didn't just shame me. You didn't just shame this family. You betrayed the very people who sacrificed everything so you could have this life. You built your fortune on the graves of heroes." As he spoke those words, there was a quiet, firm knock on the boardroom door. The room tensed. "Enter," the general commanded. The door opened, and 2 men and a woman in dark professional suits stepped inside. They moved with a quiet efficiency that was more terrifying than any show of force. They were FBI agents. The general had coordinated their arrival down to the minute. They didn't look at anyone else in the room. Their focus was entirely on Kevin. The lead agent approached him and spoke in a calm, formal tone. "Kevin Thompson," he said, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering." Sarah let out a strangled sob. Kevin looked up, his face a mess of disbelief and panic. "No," he whispered. "You can't. Dad, do something." But the general simply turned his back on him. An agent took Kevin's arm and gently but firmly pulled him to his feet. Another agent read him his rights as they escorted him from the room, his expensive suit looking cheap and powerless. The world he had built, a world of lies and stolen honor, had just been detonated, and there was no one left to protect him from the blast. The aftermath was swift and decisive. With the evidence provided, the authorities dismantled Kevin's empire of deceit. Apex Holdings and its web of shell companies collapsed under the weight of federal indictments. The arrests were quiet, professional, and final. There were no dramatic headlines, just the quiet, grinding work of the justice system. In the weeks that followed, General Thompson moved with the purpose of a man on a mission. He liquidated a significant portion of his own assets and, combined with the funds recovered by the SEC, established the Gold Star Family's Restitution Fund. Its purpose was simple: to make whole every family that Kevin had victimized and to provide ongoing financial counseling and support. He created a board, and he asked me to be its director. It wasn't a job, it was a duty. I had spent my life disarming bombs. Now I would spend the rest of it helping to rebuild what men like Kevin had tried to destroy. I had found a new purpose. A month after the arrests, Sarah came to my apartment. She looked thin and tired, the hollowed-out look of someone whose world had been built on a lie. There were no tears, no dramatic pleas. She stood in my doorway and looked at the floor. "Dad," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I am not here to ask you to forgive me. I don't deserve that." She finally looked up, and her eyes were clear of all the old illusions. "I am here to ask if I can help. At the fund. I'll answer phones, make coffee, anything. I need to do something to atone." I looked at my daughter, truly saw her for the first time in years. The lost, manipulated girl was gone. In her place was a woman beginning the long, hard work of finding herself. The path back would not be easy for us, but for the first time I saw a path. "The work starts at 8 a.m., I said. "Don't be late." 6 months later, the sun streamed through the window of our small office. It wasn't a grand space, just 2 desks, a coffee machine, and a wall of filing cabinets. But it was a place of healing. I was sitting with a young widow, calmly walking her through the paperwork that would restore her husband's life insurance funds. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes held a new light of hope. Across the room, Sarah was on the phone, her voice patient and kind as she scheduled a counseling session for another family. She worked tirelessly, quietly, earning back her honor, one small act of service at a time. I finished my meeting and walked to the window, looking down at the street below. General Thompson's car was parked at the curb. He was waiting for me, our weekly meeting, to review the fund's progress. I gave a small nod, and he nodded back. We were partners, now 2 old soldiers in a new kind of fight. I was no longer the forgotten father in a borrowed suit. I was no longer invisible. I was a guardian, a protector, a man who had found his mission not on a foreign battlefield, but in a quiet office in the heart of Dallas. I had learned that true justice isn't about revenge. It's about rebuilding. And my work had only just begun. This story is a powerful reminder that dignity is not a gift to be given, but a right to be defended. It teaches that silence in the face of disrespect is not strength. True power lies in quiet resolve and the courage to speak, proving that the most overlooked person can bring down an empire built on lies. If you were moved by this story of justice, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more. Share your thoughts on Frank's victory in the comments below.